Okay, so today we're going to jump into Figma. So if you're interested in learning Figma for designing a website, but you don't have a lot of experience in this yet, then this video is for you. Because I've made sure that we use the most important features in Figma to create this design. And the project that we're going to create together is the simple yet modern looking homepage for a solar company. It has a great looking background image with a transparent navigation at the top, a clean looking service section, and an about section with a modern image and some testimonials. Okay, so side note, all these images that you're seeing on this design, I've generated using ChatGPT. All you need to do is to make sure that you have a Figma account. It's free to create, by the way, and I have a link in the description below that can help you get started. Also, I have this entire design on the Figma community, so you can literally just go and duplicate it. Link in the description below. All the images, colors, fonts, and even the text is within that Figma design. So in other words, everything is there for you to follow in this video. So make sure to grab that file. Now, we will be using auto layout to create this website. This allows you to quickly change rows and columns on the design without worrying about padding, spacing, or even alignment. And so, by the way, this is kind of how web development actually works. So designing in Figma using auto layout will help you understand web development even better. So with that, let's get started. The first thing I want you to do is check the description below. I do have a couple of links to Figma where you can create a trial account as well as a free account. So once you've created that free account or trial account, we're going to click the plus button and we're going to create a new design file. Now, a couple of things. This is not going to be your normal Figma design where we just put random things together. We're actually going to make use of local variables as well as assets and components. Before we actually start with the components or with the local variables or anything, we do want to make sure that we rename it properly. So I'm going to call this solar design. Now that I've renamed it to solar design, the first thing we want to do is create variable, and we are going to create a color. Now, the very first thing we're going to do is create our primary color. So I'm literally just going to call it primary, and let's assign a specific hex code to it. So I'm going to go with 1AA3DE, and that's going to create that blue color that we have. Next, I'm going to create our dark color. So I'm just going to type in dark, and in the next box there, we're going to type 0E1C29. And you're going to see that it's going to create that dark effect. The next one we want is light or white. I'm going to start with white. We're going to keep it triple F. And the last one we want is going to be light. And with light, I go with F1 times 3. Now that we've created that, I want to select all of them, right click and create a new group. And it's basically going to put all of those colors in a group. We're going to rename that, call it colors. And there we go. The next step of this is now we want to start putting together our local variables for the entire design. And what we want to do is start with our container space. I'm going to rename this and I'm going to call it container. And within that, we're going to say 1320. Once that's done, we're going to create another number and we're going to call this our grid because we are going to use grids throughout this entire design. I'm going to say 92. The next step here is we're going to create another variable, and now we're going to start working with our spacing. Click new, and I'm going to say space -1. In the variable section there, we're going to say 6px. Okay, so before I move on, I want to make sure that I follow consistency. I want to select container and grid. We want to right click and create a group. And with that group, we do want to say misc/general items. Now with that done, we do want to move it up to all variables. I don't want that within the color spec. But when we click on all variables, it will show us those groups that we already created. Next, we're going to go to all variables and I want to check we have our spacing right here. So I want to take that and we're going to duplicate it and just rename it to space 2. We're going to take this 6 variable and change it to 12. Again, we're going to duplicate this, change this to space 3, change that to 16px. And so we're going to go on and duplicate everything until we have the desired space. Why are we doing this? We're primarily doing this because we want consistency throughout our entire design. So I just want to go and create space 5, use a 35px. Again, at the end of this video, you'll see exactly why I'm doing this. And you'll also see why this way of designing is absolutely robust, and it also opens up your design so that you can modify it with absolute ease. Okay, now that we've created all our spacing, I do want to highlight all of them. We are going to create a new group, call it spacing. And again, I do want to drag it outside of the colors. The next variables that I want to create is I do want to create specific variables for my font sizes. So with that said, we're going to go H1. I am going to change this to 85, duplicate this, change this to H2. And that one, we're going to go with 40, duplicate it again. And this is going to be our H3 item. And that is going to be 24. Next, I do want to duplicate it again. And I'm just going to call it par for paragraph. I'm going to change that to 16px. And for now, that should be good for our font sizes. I'm going to select everything. And as always, we're going to create a new group. And hey, it didn't create it in the colors, which is a good step. So we don't need to drag it. But I'm just going to say font size. Okay, so now we have the base. We have our spacing, we have our general items, we have our colors, and we can also go to all variables to see all of the variables. Now we're going to take it a little step further, a little bit more complex. Now we're actually going to create some of the spacing and padding and margins for all of these sections. Why are we doing this? Again, we're doing this for consistency and also to make sure that if we want to make any type of changes later on, it's going to be quite easy to do. Okay, so going back, create a new variable, and we're going to create a number. And the first one that I do want to create right here at the top is we're going to call it section PY. Why am I calling it PY? It is padding on a Y-axis. And that number right there, I want to connect that with the spacings that we already created. And in this case, I'm most likely going to connect it with space number 7, which when we look at it, it's going to be 96. Perfect. So now we have section PY. We're going to create another one. And this one we are going to call heading row. And actually, I'm just going to add MB as well, just for consistency. This MB is referring to margin bottom. What I want to connect to that is going to be spacing 6. So let's go and select spacing 6. Let's create another one. And let's call this H3MB. And this is going to be our heading 3, and it's going to be the margin bottom below our heading 3. This one, I do want to go with spacing 5. And so you can see everything is kind of connected as we are creating this, which is good because again, if we go and make a few changes, let's say on our spacings, it will adapt throughout the entire design. So this is why this is a little bit more advanced, but it is super powerful. Next, we want to create image radius, img-radius. This one, I want spacing 2 to be connected to that. So we're going to click on spacing 2. Now that we've created img radius, let's go and create another one. The next one is going to be button radius. So btn. Again, we're going to go with radius. Perfect. The button radius that I want is going to be spacing 1, which is 6px. And that's going to be nice and small. Go again. We're going to create another one. This one, I want slide button radius. When I say slide, I'm referring to the very first section, the arrow slider. The button radius on that one is a tiny bit different. And I do want to make sure that we have that one. And that one is going to be spacing number 2. Perfect. The next one is going to be the slide button padding. Okay. And with the slide button padding, I most likely want to go for S5. So let's just go for S5 on this one. I'm going to change this padding and we're going to change that to PX, duplicate this one and change this one to PY. And on the PY, I'm most likely going to go for spacing number 4. So what did I just do that? Well, PY is obviously on the Y-axis and PX is on the X-axis. Again, don't get too confused at this stage. As we're going to put together this design, you are going to see that all of this, what we're doing right now, is making complete sense. Next, I do want to add a menu gap. Again, we're going to go for a number here. And we're going to say menu dash gap on the X-axis, and we will go for spacing number 5. So we're going to go for spacing 5. This, what we see right here, we can probably put it under general as well, because this is just going to be a bunch of general items that we are going to use. So I'm just going to move it into the general items. And as we move it, you're going to see that we have everything right there. Almost done here. There is 1 or 2 things that I still want to add. One of those would be that I do want to add a specific slide heading MB, because this is going to be a little bit different to what the rest of the design is going to be. So we are going to go for that space 5. All right, so in the next chapter of this video, we're going to start putting these things together. So stick around and I'm going to show you how to set up your artboard, and as well as that, how to set up your components. Okay, chapter two. Chapter two, we are going to go and start creating those frames or those artboards that we are going to use throughout the entire design. We also going to set up auto layout. So let's jump in and let's start doing it. First things first, I do want you to close the local variables. I want you to click on the frame and we're just going to drag whatever onto our artboard. Now that we've done that, we do want to change the width of it. I'm going to change it to 1920, which is industry standard for extra large desktop. As well as that, we're also going to change the height to 900. With that said, we are going to rename it and I'm just going to call it primary design. Now with that done, we do want to activate auto layout because we are going to use auto layout through this entire design process, but I do want to set it to fixed though, because I do want to make sure that the width and height is consistent while we design. One thing I do want to do is I do want to change the color of our frames here. I do want to go for something like this so that it just looks a little bit better on the eye. Next, we do want to click on this frame that we just created and we're going to assign that dark color to it. Now, when you assign the dark color, you can go and adjust your page color just so it doesn't blend in. So clicking on primary design on the right-hand side, we're going to say grid layout. I'm going to click on this and change the grid to columns, and the column structure I want to go for is 12. Also want to change this red to something that is easier to see. And now we're going to change the stretch to center. And over here, we are going to go and select our local variable that we created, which is going to be this grid right here. We're going to select that. When you select that, it's going to be perfect because 92 pixels is perfect to a total container of 1320. Now we can go and test it by just dragging a rectangle within the artboard. And what we could do is change our width variable. We can apply our container, which is 1320. With that, click on the auto layout, and with the auto layout selected, we can center this, and you're going to notice that our grid that we just created is perfectly matching our container. So with that, let's get rid of our rectangle because obviously we're not going to use that. Now that primary design is created, we do want to go and duplicate it. So I am going to select it, hold in Alt and Shift, and we're just going to drag it to the right-hand side. And I'm going to rename this. I'm going to call it, let's call it Euro Slider. The first thing I do want to add is padding top and bottom, and we will be assigning our specific variables that we just created. And which ones are we going to use? We're not going to use section PY because that's going to be for the other sections. This is specifically Euro Slider. So we might go for something a little bit more custom. Open up the padding so that we can see the individual padding, and padding top, I am going to set that to 25, which is going to be spacing number 4. And the bottom one, we will add or assign spacing number 7, which is going to be 96. So automatically now we already have our spacing assigned. On padding left and right, we will be going for spacing 6. So I'm just going to go and assign that. And there we go. We have our spacing set up correctly. Next, I just want to go and duplicate this so we can go ahead and take this. We can change this to services. All right, so now that we've duplicated it, you are going to notice that the grid automatically pushes forward, which is great. That's exactly what we want. When we have a look at our local variables, you're going to see that section PY. That's the section PY, which is the padding Y on the Y-axis. And we're going to specifically use that for all of the sections that we're going to create right now. So on the right-hand side, you will notice that we set 25 and 96. We do going to change that. I'm actually going to collapse this so that we can select it like that. And we can change this to section PY and it automatically applies, which is perfect. The padding left and right isn't really relevant. We can leave it at 48, but because the design is basically structured within a container, it's actually not going to be relevant at all. Next, we're going to take services, hold in Alt and Shift. We're going to drag it down, change it. We are going to rename it to about. We really don't need to change anything at this stage. Everything is good and looks good. And the last one is going to be testimonials. Hopefully I spell that correctly. But again, we don't need to change anything. Everything is set. The last one I do want to do is going to be our footer. That's the last one. And with the footer, we do want to change this up a little bit. So I'm going to split this open and I'm going to change this to 1 or remove everything. I'm going to change that to 1. I'm going to explain to you why I do it. And the bottom one, I am going to set that, and let's set that to spacing 6. Okay, so now we've created all of our frames. The next part of this video, we're going to create our components, and part of the components are going to be the buttons. And when we look at the design already created, I want to create the buttons, which is the one right here. I also want to create the headings and the subheadings. I want to create components of it, as well as our logo, as well as our background images. We are going to create components as all of these. And the reason for that is once we start putting everything together, we're literally just going to drag and drop, which is going to make life so much easier. So stick around for chapter 3. Okay, so we are going to start putting together our components in this chapter. And the first thing we do want to do is create a frame for our components. And I just normally like to drag a random frame onto the artboard. We are going to rename this, and I'm just going to call it components. Okay, so now that's renamed to components, just going to drag it to round about there. And one thing I do want to do is change the color to dark just for consistency. With that done, take the text tool, we're going to drop it into this component, and I'm just going to type out heading 1. With that done, on the right hand side, yours might look a little different, but the basis will stay the same. One thing we do want to make sure is that we do select the font Roboto. If you don't see it right at the top like mine, just search Roboto and you'll find it. As well as that, we want to make sure that the font size is 85 and our weight is set to light. Next, I want to click on the type settings, and we do want to make sure that vertical trim is capping the height. If you don't do that, you are going to have some unwanted space at the top and the bottom of your text. So we do want to make sure that we cap that. And as well as that, we also want to use uppercase for this. Zoom in, and one thing we can do, there's two things we're going to do here, but the first thing is we're going to set up a style. And clicking on the little dots at the text there, we're going to open up our text styles and press a little plus. We are going to go and create our first style. So I'm just going to type in heading 1. We're going to create that style. So now you're going to see that it's attached to a style, which is exactly what I want. Now with that done, we do want to right click and we want to create a component of it. With that all done and with that all said, we are going to take the text tool. We're going to redo this again. So just dropping it into the frame there, I'm going to say heading 2, not 3, but 2, and just move it to about there. And you're going to see by default, it is going to attach it to that text properties. We're going to detach it. So heading 2, I want to go for 40px, and I do want to go for regular. Okay, also once again, we do want to make sure that it is trimming or capping our height there, and make sure that we deactivate this uppercase, because with our heading 2 and so on, we're not going to do that. So just going to drag this up right here. And once that's done, now we can go and set that text style. So clicking the little plus, and we're going to rename this or name this heading 2. Perfect. Now with that done, we have heading 1, we have heading 2. You're going to see there's a huge difference between them. And by the way, as we go through this design, if you quickly want to see what the settings is about, you can just click on here and you can click on these little settings and it will show you right there. Okay, now that we've done that, we're going to create heading 3. Literally again by duplicating that. But before I do that, right click, we just want to create a component of it. Have a quick look. We have heading 1 and heading 2. Going back to our newly duplicated heading, I do want to rename this to heading 3. And we do want to detach those settings. Go back to our layers. I just want to make sure everything looks good. One thing I do want to do with heading 3 is we do want to change the font size from 40 to 24, and we do want to change the regular to medium. With that done, click on heading 3. We do want to make sure that we click on styles. We're going to create a new style, and we're going to call this one heading 3. Perfect. The next part of this is we're going to create the paragraph. So now we have our headings. Going back to our original design, we can see that we have our heading 1 there, we have our heading 2 over there, and our heading 3. I want to take the text tool, just drag it onto the artboard. This one is going to be a little different. I'm just going to type whatever at this point. With that, we're going to open up our plugins, and we are going to search for lorem ipsum. And we're just going to drop in a random lorem ipsum paragraph. And there we can see we do have our paragraph, but there's a couple of settings that we do need to change. First things first, I do want to detach heading 3, change that to light. We want to change 24 to 16. And the last step here, which is quite important, is we also want to change that auto of line height. We want to change that to 32. Now, one thing I do want to do though, is I do want to say auto height just so that it kind of squeezes it up a little bit and that's just a little cleaner. And with that, we can go and set up our new text style and we can call this one par. This is what we're going to use for all our paragraphs within our design. We can also right click and create a component for that. Now, the next thing I do want to do though, is create a H2 for our slider, because going back to the design, you're going to notice that this little H2 that we have right here is a little different to the rest of the design. So we definitely want to make sure that we do have settings for that as well. So I'm going to take all of this and just drag it to the bottom here. Take heading 1, hold in Alt and Shift, duplicate it, right click, and we do want to detach the instance. Going back to our layers, making sure we click on it, we do want to make sure that we physically go and detach our heading 1. But you're going to notice that I put it in a frame, and that's because we detached it from our components. So I'm just going to right click and go ungroup, and it will ungroup it for you. By the way, if I go too fast, drop in the comments below if you have any questions. Okay, now with that, we are going to say slide H2, set a couple of settings. So the first one I want to do is change 85 to 35. Light is perfect. Auto for line height is perfect. I'm just going to drag it up a little bit here. Let's have a look at the type settings. I do want to make sure that I clip the height or cap the height. We don't want uppercase on it, so we are going to deactivate that. With that done, we are going to create that text style, and I'm just going to call it slide H2, and we will go and create that. Now with naming conventions, it's completely up to you as the designer. Right click, I just want to tidy this up a little bit. And now we do have our H2. I'm just going to right click and create a component for it. On the right hand side, when we look at local styles, we're going to see we have heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, we have paragraph, and we have slide H2. As well as that, if we go to assets, we do have heading 1, heading 2, H2 or slide H2, and we do have the lorem ipsum. So one thing I did notice is we did not create a component for heading 3. So we can right click and create a component for that. I do want to create a menu item that we're going to use. At the bottom here, I'm just going to click and I'm going to say menu item. And with that done, we want to detach any type of text settings that it has. I do want to change this. I'm going to change this to 16px. Now with that done, we are going to go and create that text style. And with that, we're going to say menu item. Okay, menu item is created and we can right click and create a component for it. Okay, so in the next chapter, in the next step of this video, we are going to put together our heading and subheading components as well as buttons, as well as those background images. Having a look at the original design, I'm going to show you how to put this in and reuse it to make your life so much easier coming up. First things first, we want to take this menu item right here, and I'm actually going to grab it from the components or the assets on the left-hand side. I'm just going to drag it onto the artboard right here. And what I want to create is, if I zoom out here, I want to create this get quote button. So going back to our design, we're going to rename or change menu item, and I'm going to type out get quote. Now going back to layers, we have it right here. It says menu item, which is fine, but we do want to group it and activate auto layout. I want to make sure that the orientation is set to horizontal. I do want to set the gap. I want to set that to spacing 1, as well as the padding left and right. We do want to set that to spacing 4, and padding top and bottom, set that to spacing 2. So that's essentially going to give us that padding top, left, right, and bottom. Next, I do want to set the border radius for this. We're going to look at the local variables and just scroll down because I think we did create a BTN radius right there. So we're going to use that. And with that, we do want to activate stroke, and the stroke that I want to activate is going to be white. Next, we do want to add an icon. So clicking on this, making sure we have the frame selected, and it says frame 1 right now. And I'm actually going to change this, and I'm going to say menu button. We want to make sure we open that up. We're going to go to plugins now, and I want you to search for material symbols. Now mine is favorite, that's why it's showing there. But once you open up material symbol, I just want to double check. I want the arrow right. So I want to go for rounded year, weight 500. And now we can search for arrow right. And you're going to see that there is a few there. So I'm just going to change this. I'm going to change this to right. And I think I'm going to go for this one. Now you can go for whichever one you want. That is absolutely fine. Be creative. Go for something different for sure. Okay, clicking on it, we are going to drop that in. But one thing you're going to notice though, it's not going to drop it into our actual menu button frame. So we want to take this and just drag it in there. When you do that, we do want to change the color. I want to change the color to white, but there's a couple of things that we do need to change here. Obviously the font size of this, or the size for that matter, is way too big. And it's set to 24. So I do want to change that, and I'm going to change that up. I'm probably going to set this manually. So we want to change that to 16 and see how that looks like. I think that's going to work. It's not 100% there. And the reason for that is when you click on menu button, we do want to make sure that the orientation is set to align left and center for that matter. Okay, with that, get a quote button or get quote. Oh, there's two T's there. I definitely want to change that. So it's only one T. Now with that, we do want to create a component of this so that we can reuse it. We're going to right click and create component. Now I'm going to take this button, just move it to about there. Okay, so now that get quote is done, the next button I want to create is our solar solutions. So going back to our design, taking the text tool, and by the way, I am creating this one a little different because I just want to show you that there is so many ways of doing this. Okay, so we do have our solar solutions just typed out on the right-hand side. I'm seeing that it's using menu item. That's exactly what I want. With that, I'm going to group this together. It's going to say group one. We're going to activate auto layout, make sure that everything is centered, which it is. Just going to rename this. I'm going to call it slide BTN. And with that, we do want to set a couple of settings. And the settings I do want to set, just clicking on it, is the padding left and right, or the padding X. I do want to set that to 35, which is space 5. And padding top and bottom, I do want to set it to 25, which is space 4. With that done, we do want to activate the stroke, and the color I want to go for is going to be white. The same for this though. I do want to go, and I think we actually created a slide button radius. We're going to use that one. And there we go. We have our solar solutions button. We're going to right click and create a component for it. Going to assets, we're going to see that we have our slide BTN there. The next step is I do want to create a primary button. So going back to the design, this learn more, let's go and create that. Start from scratch again. So taking the text tool, I'm just going to say primary button. Okay, so with that added, just going to drag it to the left here. One thing I do want to do though is detach menu item, because I do want to set it to bold as well as change the fill. I want to change that to the primary color. So it's saying primary button. And now we can actually go and create a text style for it. And I'm just going to call it BTN text. All right, so now that we created our text properties for our button as well as the full, go and group it, rename it, calling it primary BTN. Activate auto layout on the right-hand side. Make sure everything is centered. And one thing I do want to set here is I want to apply a variable, and the variable I want to apply is space 2. With that done, click on the plugins, open up material design, go for round again, go for 500. We're just going to type in arrow, select that specific arrow that I want. Again, you can use whatever you want. We have it right here. Change the color to primary. One thing we do want to do is we want to drag this into our primary button, because you're going to notice as per default, it doesn't do that. Taking this and dragging it right here. One thing I do want to do is just decrease this to 20. There we go. We have our primary button. We're going to select our primary button, right click and create a component. Okay, so the next component I do want to create is going to be our heading and our subheading. Do want to go to assets, take heading 2, drop it in, right click and detach instance. Now, when you detach the instance in your layers itself, it is going to be within a frame. So I'm just going and ungrouping that. Take heading 2, rename it, just call it heading. We're going to duplicate it by holding an Alt and Shift, add subheading as the text item. Now that's done, we're going to detach this, change this to 16px, change this to medium. And the other thing I do want to do is probably assign a darker color to it. Now there's two options. You can either assign a color or you can decrease the opacity. I'm going to change it to about 40. And there we have our heading subheading. I am going to group this together, activate auto layout, make sure everything is centered. And this spacing right here, change the variable, change it to 16. And there we go. We have our heading subheading. Now it's on the left-hand side, it's frame 1. We do want to change that. I'm just going to call it heading subheading. We're going to reuse this throughout our entire design. So with that, right click, create component. All right. So with that done, let's just move this to right here. The next one I do want to create is the rectangle for our images. Taking the rectangle tool, just dropping it onto the artboard. The width that I do want to set by default, and by the way, we are going to change this, 612, and the height for now is going to be 448. With that, just drag it to the top there and change the border radius. Now the border radius, we do have a variable for it. I'm just going to set it right there. Now I want to create a shadow for it. Let's just go and change this to white. Go to plugins and look for Shadow Maker. Again, just search for it at the top here and you'll see it. I'm going to open it up and I want to add a specific shadow to this. So I'm going to drag it to about there and up the opacity a little bit. We're not going to be able to see it. So I'm going to click on this and just make the color a little bit darker so I can see that shadow right there, which is pretty good. I'm just going to play around with it a little bit, just decrease the opacity just a tiny bit and hit apply. Once that's done, in the effects, we are going to create a new effect and calling it shadow right. Now with that done, we do have a shadow right. Duplicating this again, detach the shadow, get rid of all of this. Clicking on it again, and we're going to open up that shadow maker once again, but this time I'm going to move the shadow to the left-hand side, up that opacity again to about there, and hit apply. On the right-hand side here, we are renaming it to shadow left, and now we have shadow left and shadow right. Getting rid of this one. Now, before we create a component, go back to layers. I do want to rename this. We're just going to call it IMG place holder. Now with that done, right click and create component. And there we go. We have our image component created. Just have a quick look in the assets. We do have it right there. All right, so the last component I want to create is the main menu. Going back to the original design, I essentially want to create that. It's just going to make life so much easier if we go and create it right now. Going to the left-hand side on the assets, we do want to start off with menu items. We're just going to drag it in there and we're just going to click on it, zoom in, rename it, and we're going to call it home. Now, one thing you're going to notice is the width of this item isn't perfect. And the reason for that is because it is constraining to that of the original component. So we can right click and detach the instance. When we've done that, we do want to go and ungroup this so that it is perfect like that. Going to take this, we're going to clone or duplicate it by holding an Alt and Shift. The next one I want is solar and power. All right, so with that done, we're going to take this, duplicate it again, change this to services, take this again, duplicate it, change that to about, and the last one we want is going to be contact. So changing that one to contact. Perfect. Now we're going to take solar and power, group it together. We're going to rename it to drop down. Once we've done that, activate auto layout. Make sure the orientation is set to horizontal. Do you want to assign a variable? And the one that I want to set is 6. Now with auto layout set to solar and power, and we renamed it to drop down, open up the plugins, go to material symbol and search again for arrow. And the one that I probably want for this is going to be arrow down. And that's the one I want. But before we select that, we do want to make sure that it's rounded and make sure that it's set to 500. Click on that and it's going to drop that in. But again, it's not going to drop it in where we want it. Take that and drop it into drop down right there and change the color to white. Also, just drag it to the end. I do want to make sure that this is much smaller. So about that size looks pretty good. Now with that done, we can finish off the menu here by selecting all of them, group it together, rename it to main menu, activate auto layout, and the spacing I want in between, we do have a specific variable set for it, and it's going to be menu gap X. Last thing I do want to do though is make sure that the alignment is set to left and centered. And there we go. We do have our menu structure, right click, create component of it. Okay, those are all the components that we are going to use throughout the design. Going back to the original design, I am going to reuse this logo because it took me a bit and I don't want this video to end up being super long. So we're just going to reuse that. And again, you do have access to the original design. You can do exactly the same when following my tutorial. Okay, now that that's dropped in, I'm just going to move it to about there and take this and create a component of it. Before I do that, I want to go to layers. Just want to make sure it's named logo, which it is. I'm going to right click and create component. The next step in this video, I'm going to show you how to manipulate these images and add this beautiful effect that we have over here. And then we're going to start putting everything together coming up. Okay, in this part of the video, we're going to focus on those images. Now, before you ask, these images are in the original design, so you can literally reuse them. To use them, you can highlight all of it, hit Control C and drop it into your new design and it will be right there. Now that it's added to the design, let's add that effect. So clicking on the very first one here, go back to layers. It's saying image 1.1. Going to rename that. I'm going to call it slide BG. Let's zoom in. One thing I do want to do is make sure it's selected and click the little plus button. Change this 20% to 100. Open this up. Change it to a linear gradient. The top one by selecting it right there at the top. Let's change this one to 80. Clicking on the other one, which is on the right hand side here, let's change that one to 95. So now we can play around with colors, selecting the first one again. Let's go to a more of a blue color and let's move this up. So I'm going to change it to about there. At this stage, you can change it to whatever you want. You can change it to a different color. I am going to stick with blue though, changing it to about there. And the same for the other color, also moving it to about there. All right, so now that we set our linear gradient, one thing I do want to do is up the contrast just a little bit and also decrease the temperature just because I want a little bit more of a blue color coming through on this background slide. All right, with that done, we created that linear effect we're going to use throughout the design. Click on the styles and variables, click the plus button, and create that specific style. So slide BG is what I want. And you're going to see in the properties, we have the linear and the image. All is good. Let's create that style. For the other images, let's just go and add that as a style property as well. Going on the little plus here, clicking on style, make sure you don't select variable, but style. Change this to IMG2. And the same for this one. Click on the styles. Let's create a new one. Make sure you select style. Go for IMG3. And this one would be, of course, IMG4. So same thing, click on style, IMG4. All right, so now that we have the images, the components, and all of our text styles and properties set up, and our local variables for that matter, we can start putting everything together. So going to Euro Slider. Now, this is a personal preference. I'm just gonna go and deactivate layout grid. I don't personally use it a lot, but you can either use it or not use it. It's up to you. What we wanna do is select Euro Slider, go to full and add that image that we just created. Next, we do want to go to assets and take this menu we have and insert it right there. One thing I do want to make sure is auto layout is set. I do want to move this one to the top here. We can notice that nothing is happening. So let's go to the layers and just have a quick look at why nothing is happening. And I think it's because this is not properly added to our Euro slider. So let's go and do that. I'm just going to minimize some of these things just to make life a little easier. Take main menu and move it into Euro slider. And there we go. It's right there. See how everything is kind of coming together, it's slotting together. Next, we do want to take this main menu, group it together, activate auto layout, and I want to change this 10. Let's change it to auto. And on top of that, also change this hug. We want it to fill the entire thing. With that, also the orientation needs to be set to horizontal. It's by default set to vertical. So set that to horizontal, go to our assets, and now let's look for our logo. So I don't see our logo. Oh, it's right there at the bottom. Take our logo, just drag it in right there. And you're gonna see that it didn't drag it exactly where I want. I wanna make sure we put it in this frame. So I wanna rename this container. I'm gonna call it container full. And once that's done, take the logo and drop it in there. You're gonna notice though, that it pushed our menu to the right-hand side. That's perfectly fine. The next step here is go to assets, get our get quote button, drop it in here, go back to our layers and make sure that we have this menu button. And we're going to put it right there at the end. And there you go. Just like that, we created our nav and see how easy it is when you set everything up properly. One small thing I do want to do is I want to make sure that we set the align to center. There we go. That looks pretty good. Right. Next up though, we do want to create this heading 1, heading 2. Now in the description of this video, I have the content that I've been using in a Figma file as well. So I have it right here. We're going to copy and paste everything and use it throughout the entire design. So first thing I do want to do is click on renewable energy. We're going to Control C or Command C that, and we're going to drop that in here. What we're going to do though, is we're going to look for heading 1. We're going to drag that in here, double click on it and paste that content. You're going to see that it's going to be the wrong color. That is fine. We're going to click on our full here and we're going to make sure that we use white. Now there's a couple of things here. Kind of messed up a few things here. So we do want to make sure that we fix this up. One thing we can do though, go to Hero Slider itself, and you're going to see that the layout here, we do need to set that to vertical. With that said, we do want to move this to the bottom. Okay, with that done, we want to change this fix. We want to set that to full, which is going to set that to about there. The next step we do want to do is go back to our Hero Slider and change this. We want to change that to auto. And you're going to see that it moved everything to the bottom, which is exactly what we want. Probably going to go for left aligned. It's not really going to do anything. Now that with that done, let's go to a Figma and take our second slide heading. We're going to copy that and drop that in, but we're going to go to assets. I want to look for that slide H2, take that slide H2, drop it in, double click on it and paste in what we copied from Figma. Again, we want to make sure that the color is white. With that all done, we want to select slide H2 and heading 1, group those two together, activate auto layout, and I'm just going to rename it content slider. And with that on the right hand side, change the auto. We want to apply a variable and we want to go for 25. One thing you're going to notice is when you set up auto layout, it will change the height to fixed. We want to change that to hug and it'll move everything to the bottom. So at this point, that looks pretty good. Now, just a small little thing that I do want to do, just opening this up, I do want to change this to title case. Just quickly go and change that. There's a different way of doing this as well, but I feel like this is probably the easiest way of doing this. Next thing we want to do is go to assets and drop in a paragraph. So we're just going to drop it in right there and then go to our Fig Jam. So I'm just going to hit Control C or Command C, go back to our design, double click on that and drop that in. Again, we do need to change our font color. We want to change that to white. And the other thing I do want to do as well, when we go to the layers and we have a look at this, do want to make sure that we set this to fill. But when I set it to fill, it's going to stretch everything, which is not what I want. So I'm just going to override this and move it to about there. And the last step I do want to do is take this, rename it. We're going to call it slide par. Take slide par, content slider, group those two together again, rename it to bottom half, activate auto layout, and the gap in between, we want to set that to 48. Now again, the height is going to be fixed. We do want the height to be set to full. And there we go. It's already looking so much better. Taking arrow slide, hitting the little preview button, getting that to load up. You're going to see that we are getting closer. Now, sometimes your image or the background image will take a second to load up. That is fine. But we're already a step ahead here. That looks pretty good. We still need to fine tune a few things here and there, but it's getting closer. Next, I want to take those buttons that we created, going to assets, taking that slide button, just dropping it in right here. And you see how easy it is when you've set everything up. It makes life so much easier. One thing I do want to do is take the slide button and move it into bottom half. It will open up automatically on the left-hand side here. Just want to drag this to the bottom and you're going to see it's right there, which is perfect. We do want to add that other button. And the other button we're probably going to need to do manually. Taking our slide BTN, Control G, activate auto layout and change the layout to horizontal, change it to the left right here, clicking on frame 1 here at the bottom. We're going to rename it to BTN group. And with that done, take the text tool and just drop this in, type out speak to a pro. With that done, we're going to take our text tool and move it into that button group. And also we want to make sure that it's to the end right there. Last thing I do want to do is set the actual gap, and I want to set that gap probably to 35 or 48. Let's go for 48. All right, so with that done, let's navigate to preview, have a quick look. This looks really good and see how easy it took to put together this section. Now with all that done, make sure to stick around because we will be putting together services, about, and testimonials. And as you can see, it's pretty quick. It's pretty easy once you've set up your base like I did. Make sure to stick around. All right, so in this part of the video, we will be creating the service section. First things first, let's navigate to assets and drop in that heading and subheading component or asset that we created. Let's go to the Fig Jam and copy and paste what we have. So I do have the content there. By the way, I do have the link of this Fig Jam file in the description of this video below. Make sure to check that out if you want to follow it step by step. Now, when you drop it in, as always, we do want to change that to white. I'm gonna go back. I'm going to close this little play button. Otherwise, it distracts me. I'm going to copy that, tailor to perfection. Notice that we have F and 40. Do want to make that a local variable. Going to local variables, let's navigate to colors, create a new variable. Let's add that color. And I'm going to say subheading color. Now with the F, let's open that up and let's change this to 40. Now with that done, let's close local variables, navigate over to subheading again, and let's paste that in. Once that's pasted in, clicking on fill and clicking on the libraries, let's click on that newly created subheading color. Now, one thing I do want to note though is clicking on the dots. You can also change the orientation of this if you prefer it to be within a column section rather than in a row section. Closing that up, let's navigate to the Fig Jam account. We have 4 spots here that we do need to add, and looking at the original design, we do want to replicate this look and feel. Let's go back and have a peek at what we have here. Going to layers and having a look, we do have our heading and subheading. I just want to make sure to see the orientation of this frame is not correct. It's set at horizontal, so we do want to change that to vertical because we want to make sure that everything stacks underneath each other once we start adding more things. So with that, let's go to assets and let's start adding a H3. So taking this right here and let's drag that in. With that, let's go and also drop in a bit of paragraph there, and let's drop in a primary button. Now that we have that, let's navigate to the layers. We're going to work on a little bit of housekeeping here. So we do have the button, the paragraph, and the heading. Let's select all of that and let's group it together. Let's change that. I'm going to change this to call for now and activate auto layout. Make sure that it's left aligned and let's add a specific variable to it. And the variable I want to go for is spacing 5. Now that we've done that, we can take this call and start duplicating it. But before we duplicate that, I do want to create a row. So grouping it together again, create that row and activate auto layout. With auto layout activated, I do want to set it to auto and I want to set a fixed width, and the fixed width I want to go for is our container. And the reason for that is because you want to make sure that the row follows the container and make sure that it's within our grid space. So just looking for it right here. I have it right there. And now we have that. Let's take this column and let's add some content. Go to the Fig Jam and let's copy solar panel install, which is the one that we want for that. Add it to the heading right here. Also, we want to make sure we change the color here. Go back to Fig Jam, get that paragraph and paste that in as well. Also, once again, make sure to change that color, and learn more is the button text. So we can just quickly add that manually. All right, so now that we've added that, now let's go and try and duplicate this item. Click on the call. We will duplicate this and duplicate it 3 times. I do want to add a little bit of gap in between them. So as far as I know, I used 48, which is spacing 6. Let's go to that row, go to auto layout, change this auto. Let's apply a 48 to it, and that should be good to go. Now, once again, we do need to fine tune our paragraph here. The paragraphs are very finicky. Sometimes they are just not great at all. So we do want to make sure that we set that to full, and that should fix that for us. By the way, I am going to drop a video about this multi-edit or multi-edit for text. So make sure to stick around, make sure to smash that like and subscribe button. I do post videos like this on a daily, weekly, and or monthly basis. All right, moving to our Fig Jam. Let's quickly go ahead and copy the rest of them. Copying storage solutions, efficiency audit heading, and financing and incentives. All right, now with those copied, I do want to go back to the headings and I just want to change the colors of them as well. Selecting them on the left-hand side of the layer, we can go change this color and change it to white. Now, the last step here is adding the paragraph item or the paragraph content for that matter. So storage solutions, we're going to have that there. Let's change that to white. And that's the downside of this. There isn't a great way to kind of manage content. There's one way to do that by using local variables. And that's the crazy thing. I was actually shocked. You can use local variables to manage your content of your website design as well. And this is kind of pretty cool because that can make it quite robust. So make sure if you want me to drop a video about that, drop it in the comments below and let me know. All right, now we've added all the content that we want. Now we just got to clean up everything. First thing I want to do, select services and change the fixed height to hug. Now that we've done that, we also want to add a variable to the spacing between the heading and those items. I do want to go for 48. Of course, you can go with whatever you want. And there you go. Services is done. So we're just going to drag that up a little bit and let's work on about. So going back to the original design, let's have a look at what we did here. So we do have heading, subheading, some content, and an image. So going back to this design, let's start off with just minimizing all of our layers here. It can get cluttered quite quickly. Navigate to assets. Let's drop in that heading, subheading. Go to Figma. Let's go and grab the content. And as you've seen, or as you know, the content is kind of a tedious step or a tedious process. And you gotta always make sure that you copy it correctly. Copy that from Figma and let's drop that in as a subheading. Do want to add that variable again, and there we go. Now that we've done that, let's go back to our assets and components and let's drop in that image that we have. Now that we have that image, we do have to do a little bit of housekeeping. So taking these 2 items here on the left-hand side in our about frame, we're going to group that, activate auto layout. Just going to rename it, going to call it row. And with that done, we do want to add a bit of spacing here. And the spacing I'm going to go for is 96. By the way, I did create a video where I explain why I use row and column. So make sure to check that out as well in the description of this video. With that done, we want to take this heading, subheading, go to assets, and let's drop in a paragraph for us to use, as well as a button. Let's just double check. I think, yes, I do need a button. So we're going to drag that in there as well. You can just drag it in. We will clean it all up here in a sec. Once that's dragged in, we will take this heading, subheading, as well as the button and the content, group that together, rename it. We're going to rename it to column. And once that's done, we're going to activate auto layout. And we're also going to set the spacing. I'm going to start with setting it at 48, and we're going to change this orientation to vertical. Make sure to also align to the left. Now we just need to move things about. So heading and subheading needs to be right at the top with the paragraph and then the button itself. Now, one thing we do want to do is detach this specific component. So detach that right there. And the reason I'm detaching it is because it just gives us a little bit more control. Going back to the original design, this needs to be on 2 lines, and currently ours are only on 1 line. So there's 2 ways of doing that. You can either go and press enter at the point where it says yours, so doing it right here. And that's what we're going to go for. There is a few other ways of doing that as well, but for simplicity, let's just go for that. Next, let's add the paragraph text. So taking the paragraph text there, let's copy it and let's add that in. And again, now we're going to have that tedious paragraph problem as before with the fixed in height when it comes to dealing with that. It just doesn't work. As you can see, it just does not work the way it's supposed to, which is very frustrating. And that's definitely something that Figma needs to fix. So let's go and detach that. Let's remove this group. So I'm going to undo that group and change this to hug. And there we go. It's already 10 times better. Now, one thing I do want to do is add the image. So clicking on this rectangle, click on our dots, scroll down to the bottom, and let's go for image number 2. So one thing you're going to notice is nothing is happening. The reason for that is we most likely want to just open this up and just disable it. And there we go. We do have our beautiful image. But one thing I just noticed is that it does not have everything that I do want. For example, it looks like it doesn't have the shadow. I do want to make sure it has the shadow. So clicking on this component or asset, let's click on these effects and go for shadow right, and we'll give that effect that we're looking for. All right, another thing I do want to make sure is the radius. It doesn't have the radius right there. So let's add the radius. We make sure that radius is space number 2, or actually we do have a custom variable for it. And the one is img radius, which is 12 as well. Perfect. Also want to make sure the spacing in between is 96, which we did. So everything looks pretty good. There is one small thing I do want to change is when we look at this entire column, it's set to fixed. We do want to set that to hug, and there we go. Now the last thing is I want to align the image height and the width with whatever it's in. So just changing those to full will fix that up, and that will make it more responsive to the items on the left-hand side. Now that done, let's take about and change the fix, change it to hug. There we go. We have about completed. One small little thing I do want to do is change this button text. Let's see what it was. It says start your project. So clicking on our FigJam account, I'm going to copy that and drop that in right there. And of course, as always, we do need to change the color as well. And there we go. We do have about completed. Next, we have testimonials. So let's go and have a look at testimonials. I did not want to change that height. I'm just going to tell you, I wanted to drag it up. Don't know why I did that. Perfect. So going back to our original design, let's have a look at how testimonials look like. So we do have a heading, subheading. You see how easy it is right now. We literally just drop our components in that we created earlier in this video. So it makes life quite easy. All right, let's go and drop in heading, subheading. So navigating to our assets and components, drop that in. Let's go to the content and let's grab that heading and subheading. Now, as per always, it will change the color. So we do want to change that color to white again. And by the way, while I'm doing that, I'm looking to develop this. So make sure to smash that like and subscribe button because I will be posting a video on how to develop all of this. All right, so now we have what customers have to say. The next step, and when we look at this design right here, is we need to have or need to create another image. Now we have two options. We can either copy and paste what we have already, or we can go and create a new one. So let's just go with a new one. I feel like that is always nice to create something new. So we're gonna drop that in there. And I do want an H3 as well, some paragraph text. Let's just go back to the original design. Let's just see. That should be good for now. So with that all done, let's go and add our image. Now, again, going to layers, we want to make sure that we open up our component and disable this full so that we have full control over that component. Click on full and let's change this to image number 3. Another thing is I want to change the border radius to that IMG radius as well. And the last one I do want to do is add that effect. So we do want to go for a shadow left on this one. Now we got to do some housekeeping because everything is all over the place and there's a little rectangle here for some reason. So we do want to get rid of that. I'm going to take this heading and subheading, group that together. Let's change this to a call for now. Activate auto layout. We do want to make sure that it's on a vertical, left align, and the spacing on this one, we want to go for 35. Once that's done, let's take this heading. Let's just also drop it into that column because we can manage it right there. I do want to take this heading though. I want that to be left aligned. Once that's left aligned, we do want to take all of our items that's within the frame, group it, change this to row, and that just gives us the ability to manipulate that a little bit more. Activate auto layout, and let's change or apply a space 7 between these items. So now this is already looking 10 times better than how it looked like. Next step here is we do want to take this and duplicate it. But one thing I do want to do to save time here is let's detach this heading because I do want that subheading. And the reason I want that subheading is for this text right here. We can definitely reuse this item. It can save us a lot of time. So going to detach instance, one thing I do want to do when we do that is take that subheading, hold in Alt and just drag it here to the bottom. And now we do have that ability to manipulate that as well. All right, going to the FigJam account, let's go and copy everything over. Clicking on heading 3, drop that in. Same with the paragraph. Take the paragraph, drop that in. Last one would be that San Diego there. Copy that and let's paste that in. All right, now with that all done, select them all and let's change this color all to white, which it's supposed to be. Now, one thing I do want to do though with this San Diego, I am going to change it. I'm going to assign that subheading color variable, but I want to change it to light or maybe regular. Regular looks better. With that done, let's take this and let's put it in its own group. So taking heading, the paragraph and San Diego, let's group that together. Let's call it a row because that will be a row within the column structure itself. Let's activate auto layout. Now that we've activated auto layout, we can duplicate this item. So selecting that row, duplicating it 2 or 3 times. I think on the original design, we went for 3. That is perfect. I want to select collier. Do want to make sure that we do set this to 48 just to give that a little bit more spacing. And the same for the image on the left-hand side. We do want to make sure that we set that to full on both width and height so that make sure that it adapts to everything. And there we go. We do have the testimonials done. So the last step here is just adding the content. So selecting the Johnson's family. Let's quickly go and add the content here. Drop that in. Alex R. Smith. Let's just go and drop that in there as well. The last thing I do want to do is just copying the paragraph. Drop that in there. Last one there. Switching. Drop that in. I'm not going to add the cities for now. I mean, this is something you can definitely try, but in the design that I will be sharing with you, it will obviously be the correct one. Change this all to white. Want to make sure that one is also changed to white. Perfect. So now we have everything that it's supposed to. All right. Last thing we want to do here while we have done testimonials is the footer part. So to do the footer part, first step I want to do is take the line tool. Make sure to hold in shift when you drag that line. Once we've dragged that line, let's just select it. Do want to make sure that we put it within a row. So taking that line, it didn't even drop it into our footer frame, which that can be super frustrating. So we just want to minimize everything here. Take that line and drop it into the footer there. And one thing I do want to do is set full content, group it again, and we're going to call it row, activate auto layout. And once the auto layout is activated, I do want to set this to fixed width. Let's apply variables. The variable I want to go for is container. You want to make sure that that line only stretches to the container. And when it comes to the fill of this line, we can most likely use that sub paragraph kind of look and feel. So let's go and select that subheading. And there we go. That looks pretty good. Now we can add the logo. So going to assets, let's drag in the logo right there. And the same with the menu. We already created the menu, so we can just drop that in right there. We do need to do a little bit of housekeeping here. Do want this to be at the bottom. I'm gonna group those together, rename it to row, activate auto layout, and the rotation of these guys are fine. Want to set that to fill. Go to this row or go to the footer frame for that matter. We do want to change this layout to vertical. With that done, we do want to change this and apply a specific variable to it. So probably going to go for space 5. And the last step here is clicking on our bottom row where our logo and menu is. We do want to set that to auto. Now here's a small little thing is we do want to take both of these rows and put it in a container. I'm going to group them together and put them in a container. And once that's done, we can click on that, apply that variable, look for container and click it like that. Now we've added the width, just activate auto layout. Now once you activated auto layout, it did go and remove our fixed width. So quickly want to apply that again. I'm going to search for container, apply that container, and we get to go. Now, because we applied that fixed width on a container, we don't need that in the row anymore. So we're just going to say full on that. That should be good to go. There we go. One small little thing I do want to do is I want to detach this menu structure right here, because I don't want this arrow in the footer menu of this design. So we just remove that. And the last step is change this fixed to hug. There we go. We have our good looking footer. Small thing I do want to do with this row, I do want to make sure everything is centered, which it is. And now at this stage, we can put everything together because we essentially created them. So arrow slider, right click, create a component, services, right click, create component, about, and so on. We're going to do all of them. Just make sure you select the entire frame when you create these components. So adding them to your design as a component can definitely save you a lot of time. Now with that done, let's have a look at our assets. We should have them right here. They should be hiding here somewhere. They are all here at the top, which is perfect. Now we're going to take our primary design and we're going to make sure we set everything to hug, which is going to be good. And the other thing I also want to change is the gap spacing. I want to make sure that's 0. Same with the padding left and padding right, same with the top and the bottom. With that done, take our arrow slider and just drop it in. One thing I do want to do, primary design, we want to make sure that the orientation is set to vertical. Otherwise, it's going to stack it next to each other. Next, we're going to take out services, drop it in, and about, drop it in. Just want to move this to the bottom. I don't want that to be there. Then we're going to take testimonials, drop that in, and footer, drop that in. Now there's a few small little things that we do need to do to fine tune it. One thing is, in the original design, the slider here blends in with that. So when we zoom out, we can see that it nicely blends in. So I do want to make sure that that's doing it. So in this case, it's not. So to fix that, we're going to click on this and we're going to go into our arrow slider and make sure we go into the background itself. So we have slide BG right here. And I do want to click on the settings itself. We do want to mess about with this linear right here. Zoom in so we can see what we're doing here. So at the bottom, so when you select the right one, make sure it's selected there. Click the eyedropper and let's match it up. And there we go. That looks pretty good. Close everything up. Click on primary design and let's hit the present button. Let's see how it looks like. Okay, there we can see everything looks exactly the way that it should be. Sometimes it will be a little pixelated. That's fine. Just give Figma a second or two to kind of load everything up. But this looks really, really good. And the reason I designed it in every section and every frame is because you have total freedom and you can create multiple variations of it. Make sure to drop in the comments below if you want me to create a video about different variations and presenting different design options to your client. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to smash that like and subscribe button. And then till next time.